On a lonely highway, two arrogant cops stop a black biker without cause. Their tone drips with contempt as they try to humiliate him. The biker's calm silence, his symbolic gesture, and one chilling line leave the officers unsettled. A cliffhanger. Hints that they have no idea who they just stopped. "We don't like your kind riding through here." The words cut through the night air like a knife. The flashing red and blue lights splashed across the cracked asphalt of an empty highway, painting the black biker in an unnatural glow. His helmet reflected their arrogance, a mirror of the contempt standing before him. Two cops stepped out of the cruiser, swagger heavy in their boots. The taller one, Officer Daniels, smirked as if he had cornered prey. His partner, a younger rookie named Harris, adjusted his belt and tried to mimic the same authority. "You think this is your road?" Daniels barked, circling the motorcycle. Like a wolf sniffing its meal. "License, now." The biker removed his gloves slowly, deliberately. His hands, scarred but steady, spoke of years of battles not visible to these men. He handed over his license without a word. His silence wasn't submission. It was power. Harris snatched it, squinting under the flashing lights. "What's this? You some kind of biker gang trash?" Daniels leaned in closer, his breath sour with arrogance. "You think you can roll through my county on that shiny black bike? You don't belong here. People like you never do." The biker lifted his visor, revealing calm, sharp eyes. His face carried no anger, no fear, only a quiet stillness that made the night itself pause. He didn't flinch at the insult. He didn't rise to the bait. Instead, he swung one leg off the bike and stood tall, the engine still rumbling low behind him like a sleeping beast. Daniels chuckled. "What, you think you're tough? Out here, you ain't nothing. One call and we bury people. Like you in paperwork until you disappear." The biker reached into his jacket. Harris tensed, hand sliding toward his holster. But instead of a weapon, the man pulled out a small metal emblem. Scratched, dented, but polished at its edges, it caught the cruiser's light and gleamed with quiet authority. He let it dangle between two fingers, held just long enough for them to see before sliding it back into his pocket. Neither officer recognized the symbol fully, but the weight of it pressed against their chests. Daniel scoffed. To cover his unease. "Some trinket? That's supposed to scare me?" He spat to the side, his voice sharp. "You don't get respect just 'cause you flash shiny toys." The biker finally spoke, his voice low but commanding, cutting through the hum of cicadas and the restless engine. "You made the wrong stop tonight." The words froze Harris in place. Daniels forced a laugh, but it cracked at the edges. The man before them wasn't pleading, wasn't arguing. He was warning. And warnings carried a weight that arrogance couldn't shake off. Harris shifted nervously. "Daniels, maybe we should—" Daniels snapped at him. "Shut up. Don't let him rattle you. He's nobody." But Harris kept glancing at the dark horizon stretching beyond the road. A strange unease crawled over his skin, as if the night was listening. The biker adjusted his gloves again, sliding them back on with the same calm precision he'd shown from the start. His movements were measured, ritualistic, as though he had done this dance many times before. Daniel stepped closer, his shadow merging with the biker's. "What's your game, huh? Trying to play mysterious? Newsflash, this is my turf. Out. Here, I'm the law." The biker tilted his head slightly, visor snapping back down. His voice came again, deep and steady, leaving no room for doubt. "Not tonight." A silence fell heavy on the road. Even the insects seemed to hush. Harris swallowed hard, heart thudding in his ears. He didn't know why, but those two words felt like a trigger. Daniel shoved the license back at the biker, his bravado faltering for the briefest moment. "Get out of here before I change my mind." The biker slid the license into his pocket, swung back onto his motorcycle, and revved the engine. The roar thundered across the empty highway, louder than before, vibrating through the cops' chests. But just before he sped away, he leaned slightly toward Daniels. The visor hid his expression, but his voice carried a chill that settled deep. In the night, you'll remember this stop. The bike shot forward, taillight burning red as it disappeared into the dark. Harris exhaled in relief, but his hands still trembled. Daniels clenched his fists, muttering curses under his breath, trying to convince himself he hadn't just been rattled. Then, from the distance, faint at first, came a low rumble. Not thunder. Not the wind. It grew louder, heavier, like drums, echoing from the earth itself. Harris turned his head, eyes wide. The horizon was no longer silent. Something was coming. Something big, and neither of them was ready. The rumble returned, steady and low, as though the earth itself had found a heartbeat. Officer Harris froze, his gaze locked on the horizon where the biker had disappeared. The sound was faint at first, blending with the night, but it grew stronger with each passing second. Daniels scoffed, forcing a laugh to cover the unease crawling across his skin. It's just trucks on the interstate, don't get jumpy. But there was no interstate out here. Only miles of empty highway cutting through farmland and forgotten towns. Harris knew that. His mouth went dry. That doesn't sound like trucks. The cruiser's headlights stretched out across the cracked road, catching nothing but dust. Still, the sound thickened, a low growl building into a roar. Daniel shifted uncomfortably, his swagger cracking. Fine, he muttered, pacing back. To the cruiser. We'll wait. If that punk tries circling back, we'll make him regret it. But Harris wasn't listening to his partner anymore. His eyes widened as tiny dots of light shimmered on the horizon, barely visible but growing. Brighter. Not one, not two. Dozens. His voice trembled. Daniels. You see that? Daniels turned, annoyed. His jaw tightened as the lights multiplied, spreading across the horizon in a wide formation. Dust began to rise, carried by the vibration shaking. The road. No way, Daniels whispered, his tone betraying a fear he refused to admit. The ground began to tremble beneath their boots. The cruiser rattled on its suspension, headlights flickering for a moment as if even the car could feel what was coming. Harris gripped his belt nervously. That's engines. A lot of them. Daniels tried to reassert control, barking orders. Into the void. Radio dispatch. Now get back up out here. But Harris didn't move. His hand hovered near the radio mic clipped to his shoulder, yet his eyes stayed glued to the horizon. His gut screamed that no backup in the world could stop what was coming. The lights surged closer, their glow stretching across the fields. Dust clouds twisted in the air like ghosts rising from the ground. Then came the detail that made Harris's stomach drop. Headlights weren't the only thing shining. Metal glinted in the moonlight, armored shapes rolling forward. Daniels muttered, No, that's not possible. But it was. Harris found his voice small and unsteady. Humvees. Those are Humvees. The word lingered, heavier than the roar now shaking the trees along the roadside. Harris's chest thudded painfully. He had seen convoy footage on television, rows of military vehicles storming into hostile zones overseas. But never here. Never on this forgotten stretch of American road. Daniels tried to steady himself, anger pushing back against fear. No, this is some training exercise. National Guard, maybe. Nothing to do with us. Yet he didn't sound convinced. His words cracked under the pressure of the approaching storm. The roar became deafening. One by one, Humvees emerged from the dust, headlights cutting through the night like blades. Each vehicle was painted in matte camouflage, armored, heavy, purposeful. They stretched across the highway, an entire wall of unstoppable force rolling straight toward the two officers. Harris stumbled back instinctively, hands shielding his eyes from the glare. His pulse raced, thoughts spiraling. What if this was connected to the biker? What if that symbol he flashed wasn't just some trinket? Daniels clenched his fists, desperate to reclaim the authority slipping from his grip. He stepped forward, planting himself in the middle of the lane, hands raised. "This is a police stop. You will pull over now." His voice was swallowed by the thunder of engines. The Humvees didn't slow. They didn't waver. Harris grabbed Daniels' arm, panicked. "Are you insane? Get out of the road." But Daniels shoved him off, pride outweighing reason. "They're bluffing. They'll stop." The first Humvee drew close enough for Harris to see the faces behind the reinforced glass soldiers in full gear, expressions hard and unreadable. Not one flickered with hesitation. The convoy slowed, but not because of Daniels. They stopped, with military precision, forming a barricade across the highway. Dust swirled in thick waves, choking the air. Daniels forced himself to smirk. "See? Nothing to worry about." But his words shook as the doors of the lid Humvee opened. Boots hit the asphalt, heavy and deliberate. Soldiers stepped out one by one, helmets gleaming, rifles slung with casual authority. They didn't look at Daniels. They didn't look at Harris. They looked at the empty stretch where the biker had vanished minutes earlier. Harris whispered, "This isn't about us." The soldiers spread into formation, moving with the precision of men trained for war. Radios crackled. Commands were murmured. It was clear they were here on a mission, and the cops had just stumbled into the middle of it. Daniels tried to laugh again, but the sound died in his throat as one soldier glanced his way. Just one look, cold, piercing. It told him everything he needed to know. They weren't the law tonight, and whatever was coming next would decide whether they still mattered at all. The night had changed. The two cops stood frozen in the beam of their own headlights while soldiers lined the asphalt, their boots stamping a rhythm that silenced crickets, wind, and even the officers' thoughts. No words, no explanations. Just the metallic sound of rifles being shouldered and radios crackling. With coded chatter, Harris's throat tightened. "Daniels, they're not looking at us." It was true. None of the soldiers gave them more than a passing glance. Their focus stayed locked on the stretch of road where the biker had vanished. It was as though the cops didn't exist, too. Irrelevant insects buzzing at the edge of a battlefield. Daniels adjusted his belt, trying to mask the panic twisting in his stomach. "It's some drill. Military don't answer to civilians. That's all it is." But the words rang hollow, even to him. The lead soldier, a broad man with a scar running from his temple to his jaw, raised one hand. Instantly, the entire formation froze. Dust still hung in the air, swirling in the red glow of brake lights. The silence pressed against Harris's chest, suffocating. Then the soldier lowered his hand. Without hesitation, the convoy split into two columns, leaving the center of the road open like a path waiting to be filled. Engines idled low, growling, as though holding back fury. Harris whispered, voice cracking, "They're waiting." For him, the realization dropped like a stone into his gut. Every rifle, every soldier, every engine, they weren't here for random patrol. They were here for the biker. Daniels's pride battled with reason. He stepped forward, trying to regain ground. "You can't just roll in like this. This is my jurisdiction, damn it." His voice bounced off steel and silence, swallowed before it reached anyone. No soldier responded. No head turned. Daniels might as well have been shouting into the void. The sound of his own desperation made Harris shrink further back. He could see it in the soldiers' posture. The respect wasn't theirs to give. They were already standing in it, breathing it, waiting for its arrival, and then came the sound. Not thunder, not rumbling. The sharp, piercing roar of a motorcycle. Engine tearing through the night. The same bike they had stopped minutes ago. Harris's heart lurched. His palms went clammy. Headlights flared in the distance, growing brighter, cutting through the soldiers' formation like a beacon. The convoy didn't move. They held their line, forming a living corridor down the center of the road. The biker was returning. Daniels hissed, "What the hell?" His bravado faltered. For the first time, he sounded less like an officer and more like a man caught in the wrong storm. The bike roared closer, engine snarling, echoing against the Humvees' armored sides. Harris's body vibrated with the sound, the ground trembling beneath his boots. Soldiers raised their heads, shoulders squared, a silent acknowledgement of who was coming. And then he appeared. The black biker, visor down, leather jacket gleaming beneath the lights. He shot down the open corridor with perfect control, each twist of his throttle commanding the night itself. Soldiers didn't flinch. They didn't move. They stood taller as he passed, eyes locked, like statues saluting a king. Daniel stumbled back a step, words failing him. He saw it now. This wasn't coincidence. This wasn't luck. The biker hadn't been stopped. He had been intercepted, and Daniels had been the fool who tried to cage something far larger than his badge could contain. The bike screeched to a halt in front of the lead Humvee, dust exploding around the tires. The rider swung one leg off, standing tall, helmet still concealing his face. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The scarred soldier approached, posture sharp as steel. And then, in one fluid motion, he raised his hand to his temple. A salute. The entire formation followed. Dozens of soldiers, rifles slung, boots planted firm, saluting the man Daniels had mocked, belittled, and tried to humiliate just minutes ago. Harris's knees weakened. The weight of it all crushed down on him. This man wasn't a nobody. He wasn't just a biker. He was someone powerful. Someone commanding a force that could roll 50 Humvees into the night without hesitation. Daniels's voice cracked as he tried to cover his fear. No, this is insane. Who the hell is he? The biker turned slowly, visor catching the red-blue glow of the police cruiser. He didn't lift a hand, didn't utter a word. But the silence was louder than any answer. Daniels felt his mouth go dry, his authority collapsing like paper in fire. For the first time in his career, the badge on his chest felt like nothing more than a fragile piece of metal. The soldier's salute held firm, the formation unwavering. And Harris knew, deep in his bones, that the road had shifted. The man they stopped wasn't a stranger. He was the center of gravity, and both officers were already orbiting his pull. The night hung heavy with silence, broken only by the hum of idling engines and the hiss of settling dust. Dozens of soldiers stood motionless, saluting. The image seared itself into Harris's mind, a corridor of power, all bowing not to a flag, not to a general, but to the very man they had just stopped. Like a common criminal, Daniels's lips trembled. His swagger had drained away, leaving behind a man flailing in disbelief. This is some setup, some stunt. He barked the words, but his voice cracked halfway through. Harris couldn't look away from the biker. He felt his heart pounding, sweat prickling beneath his uniform. "Daniels," he whispered, "we made a mistake. A big one." Daniels spun on him, anger flaring from desperation. "Shut up. He's just a biker. He has to be." But Harris could see what Daniels refused to admit. The man's stillness, his silence, was heavier than any weapon. He stood like a mountain. While the world bent around him, the biker finally reached up, unfastened his helmet, and pulled it free. Under the moonlight, his face was revealed. Strong jawline, eyes sharp yet calm, features hardened by time and burden. He wasn't a man running from authority. He was authority. The scarred soldier dropped his salute and stepped forward. His voice carried like gravel dragged across steel. "Sir." That single word detonated in Daniels's chest. Harris staggered, breath catching in his throat. "Sir." The soldiers weren't just here for him. They were his. Daniels tried again, his tone brittle. You can't just walk around with an army like this. Who are you?" The biker's gaze finally shifted, pinning Daniels with an intensity that made his bravado collapse. His voice, calm yet commanding, rolled across the space between them. "You don't ask the questions tonight." The words struck harder than a slap. Daniels's shoulders stiffened, his face pale. Harris had never seen his partner look small, but now he looked like a child scolded before a crowd. The biker paced slowly, boots crunching gravel, his soldiers' eyes tracking him like a shadow they refused to lose. "You pulled me over because of the color of my skin," he said, voice measured. "Because of a patch on my jacket. Because arrogance told you that badge on your chest made you untouchable." Daniels opened his mouth to argue, but the biker cut him off with a glare. "But that badge," he continued, "is a toy compared to what real authority looks like." He gestured with one hand, and the engines of 50 Humvees revved in unison, the ground shaking as though the earth itself obeyed his command. Daniels stumbled back, face draining of color. Harris's breath came in sharp bursts. The realization sank deeper. This wasn't a man out of place. This was a man above place. A commander, a leader, someone with reach so wide it stretched beyond county lines, beyond state borders. The scarred soldier handed the biker a radio. The biker spoke into it with calm precision, and instantly voices replied, crisp and deferential. Orders exchanged, movements synchronized. Every detail screamed of discipline and power. Harris whispered to himself, barely audible. He's someone important. Military. Government. The biker turned back to Daniels, visor tucked under his arm, eyes gleaming with quiet fire. "You looked at me and saw a target. You should have seen a mirror." Daniels frowned. Confused. Mirror?" The biker stepped closer, his shadow swallowing Daniels whole. "A mirror of your weakness. You need people to be beneath you just to feel tall. But tonight, you've been measured. And you're small." Daniels' mouth opened, but no words came. His authority, his arrogance, it was ash scattered by. The roar of engines and the weight of salutes. Harris wanted to step forward, to say something, to apologize, but fear rooted him. He knew the damage was done. There was no undoing it. The biker raised his helmet again, sliding it back over his head. The soldier's salute lowered in unison, a wave of discipline crashing in perfect harmony. Then came the words that cut deeper than any punishment. "You'll remember me long after I forget you." The biker swung onto his motorcycle, engine roaring like thunder. The convoy's formation shifted seamlessly, Humvees ready to follow. Daniel stood in the middle of the road, shaking, eyes wide, his badge suddenly feeling like nothing more than tin. And as the biker revved once more, Harris knew the truth. They hadn't stopped the wrong man. The wrong man had stopped them. The road had never been so loud, yet so quiet. Engines hummed in unison, a low thunder that pressed against the officers' chests. Soldiers stood still, rifles at their sides, eyes locked ahead. Yet it was the silence between the sound that crushed harder, a silence thick with judgment. The biker sat astride his machine, visor down once more, posture unbothered. To Harris he looked less like a man and more like a sentinel, a figure carved from steel and fire, Daniel shifted uneasily, his throat working against words that wouldn't form. He finally spat out, This isn't over." His voice cracked halfway through, sounding more like a plea than a threat. No one answered. Biker didn't move. The soldiers didn't blink. It was as if the entire convoy had agreed to erase Daniels from reality. Harris wanted to speak, to apologize, to explain that not both of them were the same. But he knew his words would be useless, drowned under the weight of what they had done. Scarred Soldier glanced at his watch, then raised 2 fingers. Engines roared louder, dust whipped up in spirals. The formation tightened. It was time to move. The biker twisted the throttle, his engine responding with a vicious growl. He leaned forward slightly, as though signaling the entire world to shift with him. The convoy obeyed. One by one, Humvees rolled forward, heavy tires crushing gravel. Their precision was terrifying, every brake light flashing in rhythm, every movement aligned like a single body. Daniel stumbled back, raising his hands instinctively. "Wait, you can't just leave like this. I need names, I need answers." The biker turned his head slightly, visor reflecting the cruiser's flashing lights. For one frozen moment, Daniels thought he might get a response, but then the biker twisted his throttle and the machine thundered forward, the entire convoy following like a tide of steel and fire. Dust engulfed the road, stinging Harris's eyes. He shielded his face as the Humvees passed, the sheer force of their presence rattling the cruiser's windows. Through the haze, Harris glimpsed soldiers inside the vehicles, calm, disciplined, unshaken. They weren't leaving in retreat. They were leaving in control. Daniels coughed against the dust, eyes burning. "This is a violation of federal law. I'll report this." But the words died in his throat as the final Humvee rolled past. A soldier riding in the back turned. His head, eyes locking with Daniels's. No words. No expression. Just a stare that said more than any threat could. Daniels froze. Harris saw it, his partner's bravado collapsing under the weight of that look. For the first time, Daniels looked small, cornered, powerless, and then, just like that, they were gone. The roar faded into the distance. The dust began to settle. The night returned, cicadas chirping hesitantly as though unsure if it was safe to resume. The silence left behind was unbearable. Harris's chest felt heavy, his breathing ragged. He turned to Daniels, whose face glistened with sweat, jaw clenched so hard his teeth might break. We stopped the wrong man," Harris whispered. Daniels snapped his head toward him, eyes wild. "No, we didn't stop anyone. This was intimidation. That's all. Some biker gang with stolen military hardware. That's what this is." His words tumbled out fast, desperate, like a man clinging to a rope over a cliff. But Harris could see the truth in his eyes. Fear had rooted itself deep. "No gang commands soldiers like that," Harris said softly. "No gang moves like an army." Daniels grabbed his radio, voice shaky. "Dispatch, this is Unit 12. We have—" He stopped himself. His hand trembled on the mic. What could he even say? That 50 Humvees had materialized from the darkness. To salute a man on a motorcycle? That the county's 2 most arrogant cops had been reduced to dust in the span of 10 minutes? He lowered the mic slowly, his shoulders sagging. Harris leaned against the cruiser, his legs too weak to hold him upright. He stared at the empty highway, haunted by the image of the biker's calm eyes and the soldier's unwavering salute. "Warned us," Harris murmured. "He told us we'd remember this stop." Daniel slammed his fist against the hood of the cruiser, rage boiling over fear. "I'm not letting him get away with this." But Harris didn't respond. He knew better. This wasn't something they could chase. This wasn't something they could bury in reports or excuses. This was something far bigger. The silence stretched long into the night, heavier than any siren. And in that silence, both men knew their lives had already changed. The biker was gone, but his shadow remained. By the time the cruiser rolled into the station lot, Daniels's hands were still trembling on the wheel. He parked with a screech, slammed the gear into park, and shoved the door open like he was trying to prove strength through motion. "Not a word," he barked at Harris. "You hear me? Not a damn word about what happened." Harris stepped out, slowly, legs heavy as stone. The fluorescent glow from the station made his head ache. He wanted to argue, to tell Daniels he couldn't bury what they'd seen. But he knew the man was too fragile to hear it. Inside, the station buzzed with its usual late-night rhythm. Phones rang. Officers laughed over stale coffee. Paperwork piled on desks. Yet the moment Daniels stormed in, conversations quieted. Eyes turned. "Rough night, Daniels?" One officer chuckled, not knowing the storm brewing inside his colleague. Daniels forced a smirk. "Just some punk biker with a loud engine. Nothing we couldn't handle." But Harris noticed it, the pause, the hesitation. Daniels's voice didn't carry the same swagger it usually did. His words landed heavy, almost rehearsed. Another officer leaned back in his chair. "Funny. Word around town says folks saw a line of Humvees tearing down Route 9 tonight. 50 of them. Military grade." The room shifted. Chairs creaked. Eyebrows raised. Daniels froze for half a beat, then barked a laugh that sounded hollow. "Humvees, please?" Probably some redneck convoy blowing smoke. People exaggerate. But Harris caught the twitch in his jaw, the sweat forming at his temple. The whispers began almost immediately. They weren't loud, but they were sharp. Harris heard fragments. Wrong biker. Military. Daniels backed down. The walls felt smaller with every word. Harris sank into his chair, pretending to shuffle through reports. His mind replayed the scene on the highway, the biker's visor reflecting the cruiser lights, the soldier's unwavering salute, the way the convoy swallowed the night like an unstoppable tide. He knew those whispers weren't going away. Daniels slammed a stack of files on his desk, the sound startling the room. "Anyone spreading rumors about what happened tonight will answer to me. You got that?" The room went silent. For a moment, no one moved. Then someone coughed. A chair squeaked. And just like that, the whispers resumed, quieter but sharper. Harris saw it, the authority that Daniels had worn like armor his whole career was cracking. And the more he tried to patch it with anger, the more it fell apart. Later, when the station settled into its midnight lull, Harris found himself in the locker room, staring at his reflection. His face looked older, more tired than he remembered. "You should have stopped him," he whispered to himself. "You should have spoken up." The door creaked open. Daniels stepped inside, his face pale, his jaw clenched. "We stick to the fin de d story," he said, voice low but trembling. "One biker. No convoy. Just a traffic stop gone wrong. You got that?" Harris didn't answer. Daniels stepped closer, his eyes wild. "If you don't back me up, Harris, they'll eat us alive." "Do you understand? Our careers, our lives, done." Harris finally looked up, meeting his partner's gaze. For the first time, he saw not a predator, not a man drunk on power, but someone drowning in fear. "You're already finished," Harris said quietly. Daniels's breath caught. He opened his mouth to respond, but no words came. He turned sharply, storming out, leaving the locker room heavy with silence. When Harris stepped back into the bullpen, the atmosphere had shifted. Officers weren't just whispering anymore. They were watching, measuring, waiting for the cracks to spread. And deep down, Harris knew they would dot by morning. The story was everywhere. At the diner on Main Street, a waitress leaned over the counter, wide-eyed. I'm telling you, it was like something out of a movie. Humvees lined up for miles, headlights cutting through the night. They say he just sat there on his bike, calm as stone, and the whole army saluted him. A trucker sipping his coffee shook his head. Nah, 50 Humvees, more like 20. But yeah, I heard Daniels and Harris pulled over the wrong guy. He made him look like fools. At the gas station, a teenager filling his tank told his friends, "Dude, my cousin saw it with his own eyes." Said the biker didn't even flinch. Just sat there while the soldiers rolled in like he was their general or something. The tale twisted with every retelling. Sometimes the convoy was 20, sometimes 100. Sometimes the biker carried a gold insignia, sometimes he spoke one line that silenced the world. But no matter how the details changed, one thing stayed the same. Daniels's name was always there. By noon, even people who hadn't been within 50 miles of the highway were repeating the story like gospel. The legend had already outgrown the truth. At the station, Daniels paced like a caged animal. His phone buzzed nonstop, journalists sniffing for a story, county officials demanding reports, colleagues sending half-mocking texts. "This is out of control," he hissed, slamming his fist against the desk. "A damn fairy tale, that's all it is. And I'm not going to be the punchline." Harris sat quietly, his eyes on the stack of unfinished paperwork. He didn't need to add to the storm. Daniels was unraveling fast enough on his own. An officer strolled by, pretending to be casual. "Hey Daniels, you see that meme going around?" Some guy posted a picture of a biker with the caption, "Stopped by cops. Brought the army." Laughter trickled through the bullpen. Daniels's face burned crimson. "Shut it down," he roared. "Shut it all down before it spreads." But Harris knew it was already too late. Legends didn't die once they caught fire. They grew, feeding on doubt, fear, and fascination. That evening, Harris stopped at the grocery store. People glanced at his uniform, then whispered. A little boy tugged his mother's sleeve and pointed. "Mom, is that one of the cops who stopped the army man?" The mother hushed him quickly, but the damage was done. Harris's cheeks burned. As he walked down the aisle, back at his apartment, Harris sat in silence, staring at his untouched dinner. The memory replayed again, the visor glinting, the salute, the thunder of engines. It was no longer just an image in his mind. It was becoming something else, something bigger. For the town, the biker was no longer just a man. He was a symbol, a warning. A myth. Daniels, however, refused to let it go. Late that night, Harris found him in the records room, pulling files, muttering under his breath. "There's no way he's who they think he is. No way. I'll find something, an ID, a record, a mistake." His eyes were bloodshot, his hands shaking as he rifled through old case logs. Harris stood in the doorway, the weight of pity heavy in his chest. "You can't fight a story, Daniels," he said quietly. "Once people believe it, it doesn't matter what's true." Daniels whipped around, eyes blazing. "Don't you get it? If this legend sticks, we're finished. Our careers, our authority gone. I won't let that happen." But Harris knew the truth. Authority wasn't something you could defend with rage. Once respect slipped away, it never returned. Outside, the town lights flickered against the night sky. Somewhere out there, the biker was riding, leaving silence and awe in his wake. And the legend was only growing. The station's air felt heavier with each passing day, as if Daniels's rage had seeped into the walls. He no longer strutted through the hallways with his usual swagger. Instead, he stalked, eyes darting, voice clipped, snapping at anyone who dared speak. The whispers hadn't stopped, in fact, they had multiplied. The biker's legend was now painted on the town's tongue like gospel, and Daniels's name was the punchline. Late one night, Harris walked into the office to find Daniels hunched over his desk, papers scattered like debris after a storm. His tie was loosened, his face gaunt, eyes red from lack of sleep. "What are you doing?" Harris asked. Daniels didn't look up. "Background checks. Military records. Arrest logs. Anything that connects to that biker. Somebody out there knows who he is." His voice was hoarse, frantic. Harris frowned. "You're wasting your time. Whoever he was, he's untouchable." Daniels slammed a file shut. "No one's untouchable. Not him. Not the Army. Not anybody." For a moment, silence hung between them. Harris could hear the desperation dripping from every word. Daniels wasn't searching for truth anymore. He was clawing for his pride, bleeding it out onto the paperwork. The next day, Daniels cornered an officer in the locker room. "You think this is funny?" he snarled. "You think I don't hear you whispering?" The younger officer stammered, shaking his head. "No, sir, Daniels slammed him against the lockers, the clang echoing through the room. "Say it again. Say what you were saying about me." Harris rushed in, grabbing Daniels by the shoulder. "Enough. Let him go." Daniels shoved Harris off, his face twisted in fury. "They're laughing at me, Harris. At us. You want to let them? You want to be the joke of this whole damn county?" Harris steadied himself, voice low but firm. "You already are. And every time you lash out, you make it worse." The words hit like a slap. Daniels froze, breathing hard, eyes wide with disbelief that Harris had dared to speak them aloud. For a moment, Harris thought he might swing. But instead, Daniels stormed out, slamming the door behind him so hard the lockers rattled. By the end of the week, Daniels's desperation had grown darker. Harris found him meeting with a local journalist in the parking lot, shoving a flash drive into his hand. "What was that?" Harris demanded later. "Evidence," Daniels said, pacing like a man on fire. "Photos, reports, proof that the military's running rogue operations through our county. If I can expose this, if I can make this about them instead of us, then I take the power back." Harris stared at him, horrified. "You're going to war with the military over your pride?" Daniels grinned, but it wasn't the grin Harris knew. It was sharp, hollow, dangerous. "Better than letting them bury me." That night, Harris couldn't sleep. The image of the biker haunted him, the calm visor, the soldier's salute, the thunder of engines. Those men weren't playing games. They weren't the type to be baited or exposed. Daniels didn't understand the storm he was poking. The next morning, Harris walked into the station to find Daniels standing before the chief's office, jaw clenched. "I'm going in there to demand an investigation," Daniels said. Harris grabbed his arm. "You'll destroy yourself. The chief won't protect you. He'll throw you to the wolves." Daniels yanked free. "Then let him try. I'll burn the whole place down before I let that biker's shadow define me." Harris watched him storm inside, and for the first time, he realized there was no saving him. Daniels wasn't fighting for justice or even for his badge. He was fighting a ghost, a legend he could never catch, a myth that had already consumed him, and Harris knew one truth that Daniels refused to see. You can't win a war against a story. By Monday morning, Daniels was a storm no one could contain. He burst into the station with a folder clutched tight, his eyes bloodshot, his shirt wrinkled like he hadn't slept. Officers glanced up from their desks, conversations halting as he thundered past. Harris followed, his gut heavy with dread. He had tried, again and again, to warn Daniels. But the man was beyond reason now. He wasn't chasing truth anymore, he was chasing vengeance. Daniels kicked open the chief's office door without knocking. "We need to launch a full-scale investigation," he snapped, slamming the folder onto the desk. "The military's running illegal convoys through our county, and I've got evidence." The chief, a man who had seen decades of storms, didn't even flinch. He leaned back, folded his arms, and let the silence hang. "Evidence?" he repeated calmly. Daniels shoved a series of blurry photos forward. "Witness reports, inconsistencies, vehicle logs that don't match. They're out there, and they made us look like fools." The chief's gaze hardened. "No, Daniels, you made yourself look like a fool." The words struck like a hammer. Harris felt the air leave the room. Daniels's face twisted in disbelief. "You think I'm lying?" The chief leaned forward, his voice low. "I think you let your ego get the better of you. And now you're dragging this department into your mess." Daniels's hand shook as he gathered the papers. "You're covering for them. You're all covering for him. Don't you see? He's out there mocking us, mocking me." The chief didn't respond. He simply opened a drawer, pulled out a form, and slid it across the desk. "Turn in your badge and gun. Effective immediately, you're suspended pending review." The room went still. Harris's chest tightened. Daniels stared at the form like it was a death sentence. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. Slowly, the fury drained from his face, replaced by something worse fear. "This isn't over," he whispered, but the words carried no power. When he stepped back into the bullpen, the whispers had become laughter. Officers didn't even hide it anymore. A few snickered openly, shaking their heads. "There he is, the guy who stopped the general of 50 Humvees. Wonder if the Army will salute him when he cleans out his locker." Daniels's fists clenched, but his eyes betrayed him. He was broken, the authority that once shielded him stripped bare. Harris trailed behind, watching the slow unraveling of a man who had once thought himself untouchable. For years, Daniels had strutted through the department with arrogance, barking orders, mocking rookies, humiliating suspects. And now, with one wrong stop, it had all come undone. Harris found him sitting alone in the parking lot, staring at nothing. His badge lay on the dashboard, glinting under the streetlights. "They're laughing at me," Daniels muttered, his voice hollow. "Everyone's laughing. I was supposed to be the one in control. I was supposed to be the one they feared." Harris stood silently, unsure whether to speak. Daniels turned to him suddenly, eyes desperate. "Tell me you'll back me up. Tell me you'll say it was real, the convoy, the soldiers, all of it. If we both stand by it, they can't deny us." Harris shook his head slowly. "It doesn't matter what I say. The story's already bigger than us." "And the truth?" He paused, his voice heavy. "The truth doesn't need us." Daniels slumped forward, burying his face in his hands. For the first time, Harris saw him not as a partner, not as a predator, but as a man crushed under the weight of his own pride. The biker hadn't lifted a finger. He hadn't drawn a weapon, raised his voice, or sought revenge. Yet his silence had dismantled Daniels piece by piece, until there was nothing left but fragments. As Harris turned to leave, he glanced at the empty highway stretching into the night. Somewhere out there the biker was riding, unseen but unforgettable. And Daniels? He was already gone, even if he was still breathing. Weeks had passed since the highway encounter. Daniels was gone from the station, his badge returned, reputation shredded like paper caught in a storm. Rumors of his erratic behavior and suspension had spread faster than wildfire. Any hope of regaining authority evaporated. Harris walked the halls alone now, his uniform pressed but his mind heavy. He had survived the storm, yet he felt the lingering weight of the legend that had overtaken the county. The town had changed. People whispered about the biker everywhere, at diners, gas stations, schools. Some claimed to have seen him, others swore they'd only glimpsed the shadow of his leather jacket. The story had taken on a life of its own, growing in magnitude with every telling. Harris couldn't deny it. The man they stopped wasn't just a biker. He was an idea, a warning, a myth. And Daniels had been the catalyst that turned that myth into legend. Late one evening, Harris drove past the same stretch of highway. The road was quiet, moonlight painting silver across the asphalt. Memories of headlights, dust, and disciplined Humvees haunted him. He pulled to the shoulder, letting the engine idle, and stared into the darkness. And then, far in the distance, a single figure appeared. The biker. Harris held his breath as the motorcycle cut through the night like a blade. Silhouette sharp and imposing. He slowed, keeping a safe distance, not daring to intervene. The man passed silently, visor reflecting moonlight, jacket glinting under the sparse highway lamps. No words, no glances, just presence. The biker accelerated, engines rumbling, disappearing into the horizon. Harris exhaled, a mix of relief and awe flooding through him. He realized the truth. This man was untouchable, not because of force, but because of respect, discipline, and power so profound it required no words. Back in town, the legend only grew. Children whispered tales of the biker who commanded soldiers. Of the night 50 Humvees rolled into the county for one man. Journalists who couldn't verify the story still printed it, because stories this powerful didn't need proof. They demanded belief. Daniels was a cautionary tale now, a footnote to the legend. Harris walked past a cafe where someone had scrawled, "Graffiti, the biker who owns the night." He paused, reading it twice, letting the words sink in. He remembered Daniels's desperation, his arrogance, and the way pride had crumbled him entirely. And Harris understood, fully and finally, that authority wasn't given by a badge, a title, or a uniform. It was earned, and sometimes it was enforced silently, without confrontation, through presence alone. The town would remember the biker for generations. Not because he had to fight, not because he had to prove anything, but because he existed. And his existence reshaped everyone who had seen or heard of him. Harris drove home that night, eyes on the road, mind heavy but clear. He knew he would never encounter someone like that again. And perhaps he never needed to. The story had already done its work. Somewhere out there the biker rode on, carrying with him the quiet justice of a man who had been underestimated, mocked, and then immortalized, without ever raising his voice. The wind whispered his passage, the moonlight marked his trail, and the world watched in awe without ever touching him. Harris parked outside his apartment, staring at the horizon one last time. The night was silent, but he could feel the echo of the legend, a pulse that would never fade. Daniels's downfall, the whispers, the chaos, it all belonged to the past. The biker's story, untouchable and immortal, belonged to the future, and as Harris turned off the engine, he whispered under his breath, almost reverently, "They'll never stop him, and they'll never forget him." Above the horizon, the motorcycle disappeared into darkness, leaving only the faint echo of power, discipline, and undeniable presence. The legend had arrived, and it would never leave.